The first topic is obviously it's a very, I imagine, a serious topic. Shalom, shalom.
Not used to this. You can sit down. Hey, stop it.
It's so comfortable.
So
Can't really
comfortable.
have separate seating.
Right.
You guys on one side.
Okay. All right, now we have a full house. There we go. I know. So yes, Jeff just noticed that there is no English, but without you, I did manage to upload it and hit record. There are no sources. So I also, the photocopy machine did not pick up the pencil so much. So let's just we'll do most of it outside. I'll kind of use the source sheet as a guide. If your Hebrew is good and you like it, I guess you can read along and have fun. So let's take the first tshuva.
Oh, yeah. It's not muted.
1 second. There we go. Mute people. Is certainly a very serious one, but it's one which has, I guess, the halachic ramifications have dramatically changed over the generations. And that, I think, is probably because of awareness, but let me give you the tshuva. Let's see how we think we should respond, and then we'll see what he says. This is also, the tshuva is a little bit dated, so it's probably not as sharp as we would like it to be. But okay, can't expect people to be ahead of their times that much. The tshuva is as follows. There is a family member, I forget, when Rabbi Hammer was here, he told me you're not supposed to use the word committed suicide, but I forget what he told me he was supposed to use. So I think I'm just going to use it, and I apologize. Right, in Hebrew, it's ibed atzmo ladat, right? You caused yourself to be lost. Yes, correct. You took your own life. They went to the rabbi in the community, and the rabbi in the community told them they can't tear up. They can't sit shiva, and that rabbi would not even give a eulogy. Obviously, this caused the family tremendous pain and emotional, harm. And therefore, they want to understand, what is the halacha in this case? And why did the rabbi say that? Was he right? Was he wrong? That's the question. Now, in traditional Jewish literature, which means at the time of the Gemara, the times of even the Shulchan Aruch, so that prescription which the rabbi is following is from the Gemara till the Shulchan Aruch. The problem that rabbi has is he forgot to look from the Shulchan Aruch until today. Good 500 years of Jewish history. But if I was to capture a moment in time, or even a millennia in time, that would be the right answer. Right? What is, by the way, has anyone encountered such a case in their communities? Do you remember such a case?
I read in a sefer, it's very extreme, but there was some person who was very sick, and his doctors told him he must eat on Yom Kippur. And he said, I'll do what I want. And the doctor said, you must eat on Yom Kippur. You must eat. He decided to fast. He did fast. He passed away. And the Rav in the community said, because he did what he wasn't supposed to do, there's no shiva for him.
So I don't want to know who that Rav is. Please don't tell me.
It was in a sefer that from a legitimate. He was just bringing a case, to the.
Right. So don't tell me who the sefer is.
Okay.
So I will say, to Sid's point, the Rambam does say in that case that if you're supposed to violate and not give up your life, 3 cardinal sins: murder, adultery, idolatry, or illicit relationship, not just adultery, but anything that's an erva in the Torah. But most people don't sleep with their mothers or their daughters or their sisters. So usually in that case, it becomes adultery, a married Jewish woman. Short of that, you have to violate and not die. The Rambam has this fascinating language that if you choose to die anyways, harezem is chayiv benafsho. You're liable for death, except you're already dead, Meaning, but what is the Rambam saying? It's not just you didn't make a good choice, You essentially caused yourself to die. I don't know of anyone, although clearly Sid does, I don't think that. I think that's a very bad psak. forgetting the suicide piece, which we'll get to in a moment, I think that's a very difficult psak. At least there, the person thought they were trying to keep Yom Kippur. Okay, they made a terrible mistake. They paid for it dearly. They did think they were doing something right. It also doesn't work, because let's take a step back. Let's ask ourselves, why is the Gemara so severe? Right? Why is the Gemara so severe?
You value life.
100%. If somebody kills somebody else, and 20 years later they die, do we tear kriya for them? What do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, right. Yeah, we do. If somebody, gasp, violates Shabbos, you know what the punishment for that is? Stoning, death, right? A Shabbos desecrator. Are we not going to sit shiva for them? We would sit shiva for the adulterer too. Not that any of those are good things to do, right? Bad, not good. Let's get it on record. But we would sit shiva for them. Why is taking one's own life different? What do you think?
Because it's not yours. Hashem gave it to you, and you're violating something Hashem gave you. And what right do you have to do that?
The exact same thing could be made for the Shabbos desecrator and the adulterer, right? You have no right to desecrate Shabbos. You have no right to sleep with another man's wife, right? You don't have a right to do that. That's 10 Commandments bad, right? Lo tinaf. So that same rationale should apply, right? If we took that sid to the extreme, then for any sinner, we wouldn't sit shiva. There'd be a lot less shivas, right? Miss Oskin be a lot less busy.
Wasn't a fact.
What does that mean?
Well, if you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing, whether it be adultery, whether it be not taking your medicine, you're not anticipating immediate death. But if you are killing oneself, then you are expecting it to happen on your hand at that moment. It's not a theoretical.
Okay. Does that make it better? It makes it worse.
It brings it up to more of a certainty that it's going to happen, as opposed
Right,
to.
but in terms of severity of sin, it's the same, right? So the understanding was, and again, we don't think this way because we don't view people who take their own lives this way. But the assumption was at that time that you essentially made a clear-headed decision that that life is valueless, right? And if you reject the value of life, you reject God, and in that moment you take your own life, you're doing all of that, right? The person who kills somebody else because they're angry, or because their desire got the best of them and they slept with a married woman, right? Bad, but listen, it happens. I mean, sadly, it happens way too often. They didn't reject God by doing that. They didn't follow what God wants from us. But it's not like they made a conscious decision, I'm going to sleep with so-and-so in order to reject God. No, they got, overwhelmed by desire and, whatever, I don't know. I mean, it never happened to me, so I don't know, but I don't know. But you can imagine, you can envision a scenario, right? You hear all the stories where somebody at work and it's their boss. I heard that story a lot, like, unfortunately. In this neighborhood where I grew up, well, okay, you're working together, and I guess sparks fly and bad things happen. And right, you didn't make a conscious decision to deny God and reject life. You got carried away with your desires, right? So that was the understanding. If that, yes.
I would say the exact opposite. For someone to take their own life, I would envision them as being very sick, and then.
Yes, because you can't roll back 500 years in time. That's why I said, if this community rabbi who did this had stopped in the 16th century, they didn't know for mental illness, right? And that not only, I mean, I don't think they knew for mental illness 50 years ago like we know today. Go back 500 years, why else would somebody do that?
But even still, like, it seems unfair to take away from, let's say, for the parents, for a child, if they did that to deny the parents to be able to mourn the proper way for their child, not to shiva.
But there are 100%, but there are extreme circumstances, right? If somebody converts to, and we had such a case, somebody's relative became like an Episcopalian minister or something, and grew up. They knew, and they chose to leave, and they chose to, and Ashley told them not to sit shiva. That's the halacha. That's a conscious choice. They were not deranged. They were not troubled mentally. They were, I mean, it's said like heretics. I mean, I don't know what else to call it, right? But let me take you through his tshuva, and then I'll tell you where halacha generally ends up. But again, since he doesn't date his tshuvos, it is hard. So the first thing that he does is try and establish that taking one's own life is actually relatively severe. Right? And he says that life which is given to man by his creator, right? Nobody has the right, of course, to take it. And the verse that is from the Parshas Noach, actually. If you look at where it says tshuva, you can just read those, we'll read those 5 words together. There's a little arrow at the end of the line, the first page, where it says, Va'ach et dimchem lenafshotechem edrosh. Right, that it's the blood in your soul. I'm going to demand from you, and from there they learn that is somebody who chokes himself and causes internal blood, and that is somebody who takes his own life. Right, he says, I think you actually sort of alluding to what's maybe to what Steve had said before. Right, if you kill somebody, at least you can do tshuva. Right, when you take your own life, not only is your life over, but the opportunity to do tshuva is over. So he's trying to establish that at some level this is much worse, right? This third thing he says is, if somebody kills somebody else and then they're put to death by Beis Din, so we believe that their death is an atonement. When you take your own life, your death is your sin. It can't be your atonement. So on those 3 things, right, taking one's own life, he's established is certainly very serious. But then he says, in terms of sitting Shiva, this is the second paragraph, if anyone wants to see it, the second paragraph in the answer, right? There is a machloket between, he says, the significant poskim, and therefore he says, if the family would like to mourn, there is no halachic, right, restriction. There's nothing preventing them halachically from sitting Shiva, all of that stuff, right? And he says specifically, you're not really sure what happens when somebody takes their own life. Maybe they felt bad, but it was too late, right? They jump off the building, and on the way down, they're like, shoot, that was a mistake, right? Wish I didn't do that. You never know, right? You can have charata and do tshuva as you're dying from the poison, whatever, however you want to go about doing it. Right, he says maybe, and therefore he says we shouldn't be so machmir in terms of the laws of somebody taking their own life. He believes that for Kaddish and learning Torah, Mishnayos, and all those things, not only should you do it, but you should do more because this person needs it more than a regular person. Right, a regular person who passes away, who had a good life, who was a good person. We do all those things, but that's like an extra. It's like a bonus for them, because they have a good life and they have they have good deeds, and so then we can tack on extra, but this guy really needs it, so we should do more. So I think the tshuva is dated probably 40 or 50 years, because I think if he was writing this tshuva today, I mean, he's not alive, so I can't write this tshuva today. I think you would have a lot more of what Lori was talking about, that we assume they're troubled, right? And I think we do, right? Anyone who takes their own life, we assume that it wasn't a clear, conscious choice, that they just want to reject God and are done with the world, but they have overwhelming issues, mental health issues, right? Depression issues. They have, crazy economic issues. Things that are really overwhelming them. But once that's the case, they're no longer, right? The Hebrew term is me'abed atzmo lada'at. Right? Maybe it's not so much lada'at. There's so many pressures, and there's, we have. I can't talk about that one. I can't talk about. Scratch that, right? But you could imagine that somebody gets overwhelmed, economically or emotionally, and but that's not a choice, right? It's lada'at is the choice. The choice to do it is what's problematic more than something else. And I think we would mostly assume that suicide no longer carries with it that stigma of God rejection and this idea that the world is worthless and not worth living and God is worth rejecting. but that there was some other issue that was, right, when Rabbi Hammer came and spoke, and that we can talk about because it's very public, and he came literally to the shul to speak about it, right? His daughter had been sexually abused, and she didn't tell anybody about it for a very long time. And at the end, she couldn't deal with it. That's not somebody who decided they hate God and they don't want this world. It just, something unbelievably terrible had happened to her, and she couldn't deal with it. Like that's a very, it doesn't, it's not Ma'amin, it's because somebody else did something terrible to her, and she just couldn't find the way to cope. Right? That's a person we would say we have Rahmanas on. Right? We have tremendous, right, compassion and sympathy for. You wish it hadn't happened to her, and you blame not her, but you blame the person who did it to her. Again, that's an extreme example, but I don't, again, short of Sid's book, I think almost all, and I think this would, I can't speak for certain elements of the Orthodox community who don't really appreciate, who sort of reject science, but my bet is that if you went to Lakewood, you get the same sock. Maybe there are some very secluded Hasidic sects that are different. I don't know. It's they also don't publish as many tshuvos. I would imagine that for most Rabbanim in Lakewood, the answer would be the same.
Elizabeth was a man, this was when I was younger, I believe committed suicide. There was a question about where to bury him. And he was buried in the middle of the cemetery.
Right.
Because in old days, they put you out on the side,
Right.
behind the fence, which is now inside the fence.
Inside the
a
fence.
relative like that also.
Right. In our cemetery, that's reserved for
But this
people
is
who are
like
married
50
out of the faith.
50 years ago, at least, they accepted the fact that
Right.
buried him with.
So I mean, you'll actually find in like some of the commentaries to Shulchan Aruch, as he's alluding to, you have to be there, you have to witness, you have to hear him say it. Right. That was their way of getting the family to Shiva, right? We have a different way, which is we just assume it's not Ladat anymore. It's not this conscious rebellious choice. It, again, as much as it is a choice, certainly that they're taking, it's not driven by a desire to like valueless, worthless life and we hate God. It's usually something else. So again, that is tshuva number one. Tshuva number two is totally fascinating because it demonstrates how much Baba Maisa, right, we can take as Jewish people. But I will tell you where it comes from. So he has two questions. One is, can you make a mantle for a Sefer Torah out of women's clothing? Right, that
thinks of something like
or people.
that.
Right, today, if once you're already donating a Torah, you have so much money you can afford the mantle. Well, let's say you're into shtetl and they have the Torah, and now there's no mantle, the mantle tore, and a woman has an extra clothing and it looked really nice, and it's the only nice piece of clothing in the whole shtetl. Maybe you want to use it. I don't know. But this is a 20th century tshuva, and the other is, and this I hear all the time: can you use a dead person's shoes? Never heard that?
Heard not, yeah.
Heard not, right? Never heard this. There was this thing, so I'll tell you where it comes from. But right, this thing is out there, right? That people don't want to touch dead people's shoes.
If you walk a mile in their shoes.
That hurt. Okay. Right, and that is so. I'll just give you the question because it's kind of fascinating, right? The person says, "I'm not terribly Orthodox. I'm not especially Orthodox, but I honor the tradition. Right? I'm mechabed masoret. Right? I like a lot of the Mizrahi Jews in Israel. They're very respectful of the tradition, even if they're not. Right, half of Avi's units like that. Very respectful of the tradition, but they're not.
Well, traditional Jew.
Yeah, but they're not in any way as we would define observant. So this is a guy whose wife passes away, and he wants to give her clothing to tzedakah. Guess the shul didn't have a rummage sale, and it was her coat was a very expensive coat, almost new. And he wants to make it into a mantle for a Sefer Torah. Right. The other thing was he wanted to give away her shoes, and when he came to give away her shoes to the whatever the organization what there was, again it's right socialit, right? It's not a religious organization. They wouldn't take it. Right, one of the workers there said, one of the workers, right, not the person in charge, one of the workers said, we don't take dead people's shoes, we can't do it, you can't wear dead people's shoes. And the gabbai of the shul specifically didn't want to use women's clothing. Like somehow dressing up the Torah in women's clothing would be like Beged Isha or something. I don't know. Right. But the gabbai, again, these, right. But the people who are saying no is the gabbai and the guy who runs the charity organization. Right. What are we, so where does, by the way, where does the dead person's shoes thing come from? So it comes from one of these fascinating sources that we have, which is, right, the Sefer HaChasidim, which is this medieval work of interesting and odd things. Not a halachic work per se, right? You know, that Sefer HaChasidim is up there with the Tzava, with the will of Rabbi Yehuda HaChasid, right? The will of Rabbi Yehuda HaChasid is the source that you can't marry somebody who has the same name as your mother. Why should we shout a shidduch over that? Could you imagine? In some worlds, they absolutely would, even though everyone seems to agree that these two sources are not significant halachic sources. But in the Sefer HaChasidim, which is literally the book of the pious, that writes that there is danger in wearing dead people's shoes, but he doesn't explain what the problem is. Right? So now Rav Moshe has this fascinating tshuva where he thinks it's about contagious diseases. And he picks up on that. He doesn't quote Rav Moshe, right? And he says that maybe, all right, and again, this is, the Sefer HaChasidim is from Rabbi Yehuda HaChasid, right? It's this source of all these strange kind of things. That maybe you can wash clothing and you can't wash shoes so well, and maybe diseases stay on shoes. So Rav Moshe writes, we know that diseases don't stay in shoes, so it's not a problem, right? But he writes here that with regard to your first question, Isser ein bedavar kolikar, there is no prohibition whatsoever, right? And he says, now, why is it not a good halachic source? So here we come to one of these halachic principles, which is fascinating, which is one that we say, but then we keep violating. But then sometimes we say, well, no, you can't do this. And that is, you cannot enact new things after the close of the Talmud. Right? Now, if that was really true, we'd have a very lenient Judaism. Right? So I'll say, he doesn't say this, is me saying this, so don't put this in his tshuva. Right? We have this fascinating way of sometimes using that principle and sometimes not. Right? Because I'll give you a very good example from the upcoming Pesach. Mark, what am I thinking about? Where they made up a prohibition after the close of the Talmud?
Peanuts.
Kitnios. Kitnios, right? Peanuts is the 20th century version of that. We can do these things, right? We do them all the time. But sometimes we decide, no, you can't do it. Now, I could distinguish between the two cases, but that's not for now. And therefore, he said, with regard to a dead person's shoes, there is no problem at all. And you can totally wear them because you can't make something up. And he says that many Gedolei Yisrael have already rejected this tzava, this will of Yehuda Chassid that's in the Sefer HaChasidim, including the Chasim Sofer, and on we go. What about using somebody's clothes? Let's forget a woman's clothing, because that's a little weird, because it's not a tznius issue, right? That we like the Torah is going to, that can you use a man's clothing to make a mantle for a Sefer Torah? Why would you think not? Right? Because something, maybe something which dressed a human being shouldn't be dressing a Torah. Why There's a certain holiness in the Torah, and maybe the two don't actually go together that well. Right? I would buy such an approach, and not actually. So the halacha is sort of like that, right? The halacha is that you shouldn't buy what we call a mantle, they call a me'il, or coat. We call it a mantle for the Sefer Torah that was used for a hedyot purpose, right? Which means something which was used for. We don't say malim bakodesh, that we ascend in holiness, right? If I wore them as pants, they shouldn't be dressing a Sefer Torah. That actually is the halacha, and that makes sense, unless I alter it and change it. and then it would be permissible. Right, so if I have, let's say this woman's coat was like a beautiful silk, I don't know what. It'd be weird to have fur, right? It probably wasn't fur, because I don't think it'd be weird to put a fur on a Torah.
In the
That-
winter, maybe.
In the winter, maybe, if it got cold. The Torah got cold, we could put it on. Like, that might be a little weird, but let's say it was just,
Why not? Is there something specific?
no, it just looked funny. No, you could, maybe they did. You know, instead of the crowns, they put like a little strimel. I don't know, could be done. Right, dress up the Torah like a chassid. I'm not this. I don't think that they had silver crowns in Europe. Certainly not the peasants. All right. I mean, today every Torah we have has a crown. It's a beautiful thing, right? We have the ability and the wealth to really beautify our mitzvos and adorn our Sefer Torahs properly. But this is the richest Jewish community in the history of the world. In Poland, they did not have. So I don't know what they used. And they could have used. They could use whatever they want, right? There's no limitation on what they could or could not use. But the halacha as he has it is, and he actually has a fascinating proof. Right, so he says the halacha is that as long as you change the form, as long as you do something to it, then it's permissible to use the clothing.
So the fabric is okay, just you can't identify, you should be able to identify.
Or maybe when you physically change it, you're now altering it from its previous identity, almost, something like that. Right, if it used to be pants, but then you cut it up and you fashion something else, so it's no longer pants, you've cut it and you've refashioned it and made it different.
It almost would have to.
Well, yeah.
There's no article of clothing you could take and put it on top.
No, but if you had a coat,
shirt.
kind of wrap it around in a shirt, again,
No, but
in some level, right? Or a sheet, meaning just take a sheet and wrap it around. So that they want. His proof is, right? What did they use from the women? This is the great women's Pesach holiday, right? What did they take from the women to make the kior, to make the basin in the Mishkan?
They're mirrors.
They're mirrors, right? So he says, how did they do that? If the women used the mirrors for regular purposes, how could they then go ahead and fashion a vessel in the Mishkan out of it? Unless they took it and they changed it. So that's his proof that you can take something which is used for an ordinary purpose and you can refashion it into something that's used for a holy purpose. That is his proof. Again, today that's not so relevant, but I think that when I'll close, and I don't think any question, but I'll close with going back to the shoes. People will swear by that. Right? You will find people who will swear by that. They literally believe that if I step into a dead person's shoes, Steve was joking about it, but they really believe you step in those shoes, you're kicking it. Right? It's over.
You're stepping on a soul.
Well, those are two different things. See, those are two different things. Whether you're stepping on a soul or that what happened to that person is going to happen to you, very different.
SOLESOUL.
Right, but I'm saying, but that it is always astounding to me that without any knowledge of the halacha, people will take this stuff and they'll hold on to it for dear life.
but we don't have a source or an origin.
It's that will of Yehuda Chassid, the Sefer HaChasidim.
That's the source.
That's the source. That's it.
And he doesn't say where it came from.
No, he just makes stuff up. No, he makes stuff up. I mean, I didn't say that in a bad way. He makes it up. He thought you shouldn't marry somebody who has the same name as your mother. Mara doesn't say that. But I will promise you, there are many, many, many chuvos about whether you have to shad a shidduch because the girl has the same name as your mother or the boy has the same name as your father. Like there are a whole host of chuvos written about it, even though he has no source for it at all. Okay, those are the two chuvas. Again, I went a little quickly because no sources, but that's fine. I think we're going to pick up after Pesach because I'm drowning. I imagine everyone else is similarly. So we will pick up after. If anyone has any questions on tonight, I'm happy to take them. And I will wish everyone a good evening. Take care. Thank you.
Have a good Johnson.
Yante.